Well, greetings. It's wonderful to be with you again. This is Good Friday, and we're going to be sharing together some scripture and some thoughts that will help us focus on what happened long ago when Jesus died on the cross. And that certainly is our focus today. But I want to share with you a couple of words of information before we turn our attention to that. This is our primary way of communicating these days, and so I just want to share with you a little bit about what is happening. First, I hope you're able to access and enjoy these videos that we're doing. They are obviously found on the church website, cornerstonechurchofalpena.org, under media and then video messages. They're also found on YouTube under the channel listed under my name, Barry Stricker, and you can find these messages at both places. But we are also going to be adding another YouTube channel, and these items will show up on our church website as well. Charlene is putting some music together, and so I hope that as you find the video messages, you will also find the separate entries that relate to the music. And we'll try to do this as often as we get together, but that will be a separate click. And if you click that, you will find some music. Charlene will be playing the keyboard. Josh will be playing the guitar. Morgan will be providing vocal offerings for us, and that will be a real special thing. And so I hope you'll pay attention to that. It won't be part of the videos that I'm putting on. It'll be something separate, but if you just look there, you'll be able to find that. And if you click that, either before the message or after the message, I know that that will be very meaningful to all of us to enjoy the music that they're putting together. I don't know about you, but I really miss our music. And I'm finding other ways to find music, but it's not the same. And so this will be a great gift that they're giving us, and they're working hard putting that together. So thank you to Charlene and Josh and Morgan for their hard work with this, and we're grateful for that. We're also considering some other possibilities, perhaps some video Bible studies, perhaps even continuing our Bible study on the minor prophets and putting those on video. And so I'll let you know as that develops, but we're thinking about that, and we're not sure exactly how long this season will go, but we'd like to find every opportunity we can to stay in touch and to provide the resources that we need. So that is a real possibility as well. And then obviously every Sunday we'll have a message, and this coming Sunday, an important message as we celebrate together. And we'll be focusing on Sunday's message on John chapter 20, and specifically Mary Magdalene and her encounter with Jesus in the garden on the morning of Resurrection Sunday. So that'll be our focus that's coming. But tonight we want to imagine that we don't know that's coming yet. And we want to focus on the events of Good Friday, which is a real challenge for us because, as I mentioned in our last video, we are people who know the end of the story. We have read all the way to the conclusion of this chapter, and so we know what happens next. But tonight is the night when we pretend that we don't. And that's very, very hard to do, but we want to do that because we want to feel deeply the loss and the grief and the disappointment that would have been present in the hearts and minds of Jesus' friends and followers on the night when he was crucified. Last year, I remember Good Friday very, very well. If you're part of the Cornerstone family, you probably remember it as well. We met in our office and classroom space at the mall. It's a very small space, but we literally loaded that room with as many chairs as would fit. And we hoped that we would have enough room, and we did have enough room, but it was very, very cozy. We gathered in that room. The lights were turned down low. We had lamps all around the room, and we gathered there to read scripture and to share the Lord's Supper. We sang songs together, and we told the story of Jesus' death on the cross. Again, it was very crowded in there. We might have been able to fit 2 or 3 more people in that room, but probably not any more than that. And we were together, and it was a powerful time of being together. That was the first evening when Charlene was able to use our brand new electric keyboard. A dear friend of our church, Barry Sheedlow, had given our church a special gift in honor of his beloved wife, Carol, and he wanted us to use that for musical purposes. And so our church was able to purchase an electric keyboard, and that's the very first time Charlene was able to play that for our church. That evening, we enjoyed Emily Kozlowski playing the flute. And Jeff Sadler played and sang "Were You There" to end our time together. And as I said, we celebrated the Lord's Supper. We had the cross at the front of the room, and we used symbols to illustrate what was happening at different points in the story. And we shared Good Friday together. And again, we try every Good Friday to feel the depth of grief and loss and disappointment and brokenness. But it's hard for us. We have to pretend because we know what comes next. Jesus' friends and followers on that first Good Friday didn't know what would come next. Even though he had told them, they didn't know what would come next. And so their feelings were probably quite a bit deeper than our feelings. I'm pretty sure that this year we will probably feel those feelings more deeply than we maybe ever have. Because even last year, as rich and meaningful as that service was, we were able to share that time together. And tonight, we're not together. We're quite apart. We are separated. On the day when Jesus was crucified, that's exactly the condition of his followers and friends. When he died, they scattered. They went to their homes, their dwellings. We have no idea where they actually lived, but they separated, and they were not together on the evening of Good Friday. They were alone, trying to absorb what had happened, trying to make sense of it, dealing with their own grief and loss. And it must have been a tragic and terrible time for them. We may this year come closer to those feelings than we have ever come before. And even though we know what comes next, we will do our best tonight to try to ignore that, at least for a little bit of time, and simply tell the story and get immersed in the story and feel what Jesus' friends and followers felt long, long ago. It's hard to be alone. This is a hard time, I think, for all of us. And we long for the opportunity to get together to celebrate, of course, but even to grieve together is so much more manageable than doing these things by ourselves. So while we long for that day when we can be together again, we embrace the experience of this story of Jesus' death. And we'll do our best tonight to feel the deep pain that is fitting for this kind of an evening. This evening, I'm just going to read portions of the story. I'm going to use the Message translation, just because I think often it's really good for us to hear words that are slightly different. Those words might jar us a little bit in a positive way. We might hear something we haven't heard before or consider something we haven't seen before. And so I'm simply going to read different parts of the story. I will give you the references in case you'd like to follow along. And we'll simply walk through the story of the cross together. And we won't read every part of the story, but some of the very, very important and significant parts of the story. And without a lot of extra commentary or comment, just the words of Scripture. And let's use our holy imagination and let's put ourselves in the story and let's feel what we need to feel. And rather than pushing those feelings aside, let's embrace those feelings and let those feelings change us and draw us into the presence of God. We are remembering tonight the most terrible thing that has ever happened in history. And we are remembering tonight the clearest and best expression of God's love. And we are remembering tonight the event that makes all the difference in the world. Jesus died on the cross for you and for me. And we are wise to remember that. And we do that tonight. Our first reading is from John chapter 13. I'm going to read John 13, verses 1 through 5, and then verses 12 through 17. And this is the beginning of the story this evening when Jesus washes the disciples' feet. As we can kind of piece this together in our story, this is something that would have happened on Thursday evening. And this is what we read. Just before the Passover feast, Jesus knew that the time had come to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his dear companions, he continued to love them right to the end. It was supper time. The devil by now had Judas, son of Simon the Iscariot, firmly in his grip, all set for the betrayal. Jesus knew that the Father had put him in complete charge of everything, that he came from God and was on his way back to God. So he got up from the supper table, set aside his robe, and put on an apron. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the feet of the disciples, drying them with his apron. Then he said to them, "Do you understand what I've done to you? You address me as teacher and master, and rightly so. That is what I am. So if I, the master and teacher, washed your feet, you must now wash each other's feet. I've laid down a pattern for you. What I've done, you do." I'm only pointing out the obvious. A servant is not ranked above his master. An employee doesn't give orders to the employer. If you understand what I'm telling you, act like it and live a blessed life. The washing of the disciples' feet. The next part of our story happens in the garden. I'll be reading Mark chapter 14, verses 32 through 50. This would be again Thursday late in the evening after the meal and the washing of the feet. Mark 14, beginning with verse 32. They came to an area called Gethsemane. Jesus told his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." He took Peter, James, and John with him. He sank into a pit of suffocating darkness. He told them, "I feel bad enough right now to die. Stay here and keep vigil with me." Going a little ahead, he fell to the ground and prayed for a way out. "Papa, Father, you can't you get me out of this? Take this cup away from me, but please, not what I want. What do you want?" He came back and found them sound asleep. He said to Peter, "Simon, you went to sleep on me? Can't you stick it out with me a single hour? Stay alert, be in prayer, so you don't enter the danger zone without even knowing it. Don't be naive. Part of you is eager, ready for anything in God, but another part is as lazy as an old dog sleeping by the fire." He then went back and prayed the same prayer. Returning, he again found them sound asleep. They simply couldn't keep their eyes open, and they didn't have a plausible excuse. He came back a third time and said, Are you going to sleep all night? No, you've slept long enough. Time's up. The Son of Man is about to be betrayed into the hands of sinners. Get up, let's get going. My betrayer has arrived. No sooner were the words out of his mouth when Judas, the one out of the 12, showed up, and with him a bunch of thugs sent by the high priest, religion scholars, and leaders, brandishing swords and clubs. The betrayer had worked out a signal with them. The one I kiss, that's the one sees him. Make sure he doesn't get away. Judas went straight to Jesus and said, Rabbi, and kissed him. The others then grabbed him and roughed him up. One of the men standing there unsheathed his sword, swung, and came down on the chief priest's servant, lopping off the man's ear. Jesus said, What is this coming after me with swords and clubs as if I were a dangerous criminal? Day after day I've been sitting in the temple teaching, and you never so much as lifted a hand against me. What you in fact have done is confirm the prophetic writings. And all the disciples bailed on him. Mark 14. The next part of our story is the trial. We read about this in John chapter 18, beginning with verse 28. I'll be reading from that point, John 18:28 through John 19:6, and then a final verse, John 19:19, the trial of Jesus. They led Jesus then from Caiaphas, the high priest, to the Roman governor's palace. It was early morning. This would be Friday. They themselves didn't enter the palace because they didn't want to be disqualified from eating the Passover, so Pilate came out to them and spoke. He said, What charge do you bring against this man? They said, If he hadn't been doing something evil, do you think we would have bothered you? Pilate said, You take him, judge him by your law. The Jews said, We're not allowed to kill anyone. This would confirm Jesus' word indicating the way he would die. Pilate went back into the palace and called for Jesus. He said, Are you the king of the Jews? Jesus answered, Are you saying this on your own, or did others tell you this about me? And Pilate responded and said, Do I look like a Jew? Your people and your high priest turned you over to me. What did you do? My kingdom, said Jesus, doesn't consist of what you see around you. If it did, my followers would fight so I wouldn't be handed over to the Jews. But I'm not that kind of king, not the world's kind of king. And Pilate said, So are you a king or not? Jesus answered, You tell me. Because I am a king, I was born and entered the world so that I could witness to the truth. Everyone who cares for truth, who has feelings for the truth, recognizes my voice. Pilate said, What is truth? Then he went back out to the Jews and told them, I find nothing wrong in this man. It's your custom that I pardon one prisoner at Passover. Do you want me to pardon the King of the Jews? And they shouted back, Not this one, but Barabbas. Now Barabbas was a Jewish freedom fighter. So Pilate took Jesus and had him whipped. The soldiers, having braided a crown of thorns, set it on his head, threw a purple robe over him, and approached him with, Hail, King of the Jews! Then they greeted him with slaps in the face. Pilate went back out again and said to them, I present him to you, but I want you to know that I do not find him guilty of any crime. Just then Jesus came out wearing the thorn crown and the purple robe, and Pilate announced, "Here he is, the man." Verse 19, Pilate caved in to their demand, and he turned Jesus over to be crucified. In Matthew 27, we find verses that describe the abuse that is heaped upon Jesus by the soldiers. Matthew 27, verses 27 through 31. The soldiers assigned to the governor took Jesus into the governor's palace and got the entire brigade together for some fun. They stripped him and dressed him in a red robe. They plaited a crown from branches of a thorn bush and set it on his head. They put a stick in his right hand for a scepter. Then they knelt before him in mocking reverence and said, "Bravo, King of the Jews." Then they spit on him and hit him on the head with the stick. When they had had their fun, they took off the robe and put his own clothes back on him. Then they proceeded out to the crucifixion. In Luke 23, we read the story of that crucifixion. Luke 23, verses 32 to 43. Two others, both criminals, were taken along with Jesus for execution. When they got to the place called Skull Hill, they crucified him along with the criminals, one on his right, the other on his left. Jesus prayed, "Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing." Dividing up his clothes, they threw dice for them. The people stood there staring at Jesus, and the ringleaders made faces taunting, "He saved others. Let's see him save himself. The Messiah of God. Ha! The chosen. Ha!" Soldiers also came up and poked fun at him, making a game of it. They toasted him with sour wine. "So you're the King of the Jews? Save yourself." Printed over him was a sign, "This is the King of the Jews." One of the criminals hanging alongside cursed him. "Some Messiah you are," he said. "Save yourself. Save others." But the other one made him shut up. "Have you no fear of God? You're getting the same as him. We deserve this, but not him. He did nothing to deserve this." Then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you enter your kingdom." And Jesus said, "Don't worry, I will. Today you will join me in paradise." The next few verses in Luke 23 describe Jesus' death. By now it was noon. The whole earth became dark. The darkness lasting 3 hours. A total blackout. The temple curtain split right down the middle. Jesus called loudly, "Father, I place my life in your hands." Then he breathed his last. The final part of the story is Jesus' burial. I'll be reading Matthew 27, 57 through 66. Late in the afternoon, a wealthy man from Arimathea, a disciple of Jesus, arrived. His name was Joseph. He went to Pilate and asked for Jesus' body. Pilate granted his request. Joseph took the body and wrapped it in clean linens, put it in his own tomb, a new tomb only recently cut into the rock. And he rolled a large stone across the entrance. Then he went off. But Mary Magdalene and the other Mary stayed, sitting in plain view of the tomb. After sundown, the high priest and Pharisees arranged a meeting with Pilate. They said, "Sir, we just remembered that liar announced while he was still alive, 'After 3 days I will be raised.' We've got to get that tomb sealed until the third day. There's a good chance his disciples will come and steal the corpse and then go around saying, 'He's risen from the dead.' Then we'll be worse off than before, the final deceit surpassing the first." Pilate told them, "You will have a guard. Go ahead and secure it the best you can." So they went out and secured the tomb, sealing the stone and posting guards. Reading those verses, my heart is just pounding right now. As I try to deal personally with the reality of what happened on that terrible day long ago. Trying to feel what Jesus' friends and followers felt long ago, I feel first of all disbelief. I cannot believe that this could happen. I cannot believe that this would happen to Jesus. Disbelief. I also feel deep discouragement. Imagine what Jesus' friends and followers felt watching that happen. They'd been with him. They had walked with him. They had seen him work. They'd listened to him teach. They had become convinced that he was the promised one. And then he died, and the discouragement was overwhelming. They said to one another, "We thought he was the one. How could we have been so wrong?" So not just disbelief, we can't believe this has happened, but deep discouragement. And then related to that, just utter devastation. Jesus is dead. Jesus has died. Jesus has been buried. Disbelief. We can't believe this has happened. Discouragement. We were so convinced he was the one. Utter devastation. Our dear friend, the one we thought was the promised one of God, has died. And tonight we do our best. We do our best to feel what those friends and followers of Jesus felt. This is a night for broken hearts. This is a night for shattered dreams. This is a night to deal with loss and grief and pain. This is a night to do our best to feel what Jesus' friends and followers felt so long ago on the day when Jesus died. I've shared this with you many, many times, but this night, this day, this moment, this memory, this is the one time, the only time in the church year when our time together does not end with what we call a benediction. A benediction is a good word. That's literally what that means. And every time we're together, we end with a good word. It might be a word of encouragement. It might be a word of blessing. It might be a word of hope. But this is the one time in the entire church year when there is no good word. We are broken. We are overwhelmed with disbelief. We are overwhelmed with discouragement. We are utterly devastated. Jesus has